I truly felt a chill down my spine when I read the news yesterday. Pope Francis has passed away. Because we had received a few strange letters, near-death testimonies sent to us quietly, claiming that they had seen a shocking vision. The Pope had died. At the time, I didn't have the courage to believe it, but everything changed when a letter arrived from someone within the church itself, carrying a divine encounter that could not be dismissed. That's when I knew this wasn't just a death, this was something far deeper. The woman in this story truly died, and at the very moment her soul left her body, she was taken to the deepest realms of the afterlife. There she witnessed something unimaginable. Pope Francis was not in heaven, but suffering in the depths of hell. But the story doesn't end there. How could someone once honored as the Vicar of Christ on earth appear in such a place of darkness? Could there be something hidden behind that white robe? A secret the world is afraid to confront? This story is not told to judge but to awaken, and you need to listen all the way through, because this may not only change the way you see the Pope, it may change the way you see your own soul. Before we begin, please leave your name and the city you're watching from, so we can pray for you by name and lift you up before the Lord. If this message stirs even the smallest part of your spirit, we ask you to consider supporting this mission by clicking Super Thanks. No matter what you give, God will return it to you 100-fold. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it today. Be part of a growing family, 20,000 hearts this month, sharing the love, the truth, and the light of God. Now, listen closely to her story. At the end of April 2025, gentle sunlight streamed through the window of a small office in the Vatican, where I, Lucia, served in the Missionaries of Charity. On the desk lay charity documents, urgent letters, and a wooden statue of Jesus I often touched while praying. Today I received a special directive to prepare the final arrangements for Pope Francis, from the funeral to the archiving of his last will. No one explained why, only that it had to be done swiftly. I assumed he was gravely ill, and my heart sank. I had met him once. His warm smile and call to help the poor had convinced me he was a beacon of light, surely destined for heaven. I began my tasks, reviewing the guest list for the funeral, drafting letters to refugee camps he had supported. But then a dull headache began creeping up from the base of my neck to my temples. I dismissed it as fatigue from sleepless nights, or perhaps from the storm of thoughts lately, especially after stumbling upon reports of abuse buried deep in the Vatican archives. I ignored it and whispered, "Lord, please guide the Church and the Holy Father." But the pain intensified. My vision turned hazy, my breath became short, and my chest felt as if pressed under invisible weight. The other sisters urged me to rest, but I shook my head. I must finish this for the Pope. Before I could say another word, a bolt of pain like lightning struck my head, forcing me to bend over. The room spun wildly. The voices of the sisters calling my name faded into the distance. I collapsed. The last image I saw was the statue of Christ, looking straight at me. I didn't realize then that I was crossing the threshold between life and death. The pain crashed over me like a giant wave slamming into my chest, nearly taking my breath away. The sisters at the convent rushed to call a doctor. A nurse arrived, administered an injection, and gently urged me to rest. I returned to my room and lay down on my familiar, modest bed, trying to focus on prayer to soothe my weary body. But instead of calming down, an unmistakable sense of unease began to rise, strong and clear, as if an invisible force was pulling my soul out of my body. I closed my eyes, and at that very moment the room was suddenly flooded with light. Not ordinary light, but something radiant and impossibly warm, like a sacred flame bursting forth from heaven. I tried to open my eyes, to move, but my body no longer responded. In that instant I knew my soul had departed from my flesh. Looking down, I saw my lifeless body lying still on the bed, my face pale like someone already gone. A wave of disorientation washed over me, yet it came hand in hand with an unfamiliar lightness. Every burden vanished. No more worries about unfinished documents, incomplete charity work, or even the internal conflicts I had about the church. The room remained the same familiar space, but it now carried an atmosphere of silence and holiness, as if the world had paused to bear witness. I asked myself, could I have died? And what about the Holy Father? Who will carry on the work? A nameless fear stirred inside me, but so did a peace I had never known. It felt as if I were being shielded by an invisible love. And then they appeared. 2 angels stepped into the light. Their very forms seemed sculpted from pure radiance. They wore spotless white robes. They didn't need to introduce themselves. Their presence alone transformed the space around them. Their faces weren't exactly faces, but luminous expressions. Brilliant, yet not blinding. Majestic, yet never intimidating. Their eyes met mine, serene, deep, and gentle, yet they made me feel smaller than I had ever felt. I trembled within, not out of fear, but because I knew I stood before something far beyond all human understanding. I couldn't speak, but a question echoed uncontainably in my mind. Who are you? An angel spoke, their voice as clear and resonant as church bells echoing through a sanctuary. Lucia, rise. We have a place to go. The words weren't merely sound, but a current of power, gentle yet filled with authority, piercing into my soul. It was like a king's command, yet as tender as a mother's lullaby. I felt a deep faith rise within me, as though the Lord himself had placed his hand on my shoulder, dissolving all confusion. Where? I wanted to ask, but no words came from my lips. The angel's eyes locked onto mine, gentle yet unwavering, as if to say that every question would be answered if only I would follow. I moved with them, not walking but gliding, lifted by an invisible stream of light. The convent room dissolved behind us, replaced by an immense space wrapped in silvery white mist that sparkled like particles of living light. There was no ground, no sky, only the sensation of drifting, weightless and unanchored. Time seemed to dissolve, no more minutes, no more hours, only eternity. I tried to look back, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Vatican, of the statue of Jesus on my desk, but all of it had vanished. It was just me and the 2 angels guiding me through a nameless realm. A mixture of wonder and unease stirred within me, like standing before the archives of the Vatican, facing secrets I had never dared uncover. Then, through the fog, a massive black door appeared. It towered so high it seemed to pierce the invisible heavens, as wide as St. Peter's Square. Its surface was made of obsidian, glossy and dark, etched with ancient patterns, like the manuscripts I'd once glimpsed in the hidden vaults of the Vatican. Texts about sin, scandal, and truths the church had buried. The carvings swirled slowly, alive somehow, breathing. Each pulse released a scent of charred ash laced with coldness, like the remains of a long-extinguished fire. I thought of the abuse reports, the shadowy financial records I had once dared to read in secret, and my heart trembled. This door led into a truth I wasn't ready to face. Fear surged through me like a cold wave crashing against my soul. With every breath of the door, my heart pounded harder, as if warning me that stepping through would mean witnessing something unforgettable. I wanted to turn back, to return to the safe room in the Vatican, but the angel's gaze held me steady. One angel, their wings gently beating, stirred a warm breeze that chased away the chill. They whispered, "You will witness the justice of God." That voice was like a small flame, igniting hope in the midst of darkness. I looked at their radiant hands as they pressed them against the door. The ancient carvings glowed as if awakened, and the massive gate slowly creaked open with a sound like wind howling through a graveyard. A blast of searing heat rushed out, thick with the stench of sulfur and distant cries of anguish. The air was suffocating, dense like scorched ash, yet the coldness reached deep into the soul. Flames roared alive, writhing with eerie consciousness. The sky above was pitch black, cloaked in smoke that smothered all light. The sound of screaming echoed, shrieks of torment so sharp they sliced through my awareness. Souls writhed in flames of repentance, unable to die, forced to live eternally in regret. The memories of their sins repeated endlessly, each time more agonizing than the last. Horrific creatures wandered among them. Monstrous beings with enormous bat-like wings, razor claws, and faces that were deep pits of hatred, tormenting the souls while cackling with cruel delight. A woman was bound by invisible chains, her soul impaled by hooks of iron, moaning as the shackles tightened. Another soul plunged into a bottomless pit, her scream fading into the abyss. The angel spoke. This is the consequence of souls who reject the light, a place where sin is revealed as clearly as in a mirror. I thought of the church. Could the popes I once revered be here? In the distance I caught a glimpse of a white robe, but the angel gently led me away. Hell was eternal regret with no exit. The angel led me into a vast hall of mirrors within hell. Cold stone walls surrounded us, and hundreds of mirrors floated mid-air, each one reflecting the soul of a cardinal. The dim light emitted from the mirrors was not warm, but chilling, like frost biting into the spirit. I saw one cardinal, his red robes tattered, standing before a mirror, his face contorted with anguish. The mirror revealed his memories, hoarding gold from church funds, concealing injustice, manipulating the faithful to maintain power. Each image was like a blade. He tried to look away, but the mirror shattered, its shards circling through the air, slicing into his soul. Blood pooled beneath him. Then Jesus appeared. The light of his presence made the mirrors tremble. He declared, "They were entrusted with truth, but chose lies, leaving pain for my sheep." Behind the mirror, the faces of poor, suffering believers emerged, eyes burning with reproach, like fire consuming the cardinal. His punishment was to stand eternally before the mirror, forced to face the falseness of his life. Every shard was a lie he once spoke. I was horrified. I realized God's justice does not overlook those who conceal the truth. I thought of Pope Francis. I believed he was a light, but a thread of worry tugged at my heart. Could he one day face a mirror like this? The angel guided me down a long corridor lined with even more mirrors, each casting a strange, pale glow that created eerie shadows. Priests stood before them, their black cassocks torn, their faces full of remorse. One priest stared into a mirror, seeing himself preaching love, yet sowing division in his parish, abandoning the poor to please the wealthy. The mirror cracked, shards spinning like daggers, cutting deep into him. Blood trickled across the stone floor. He tried to flee, but the hallway stretched endlessly, mirrors appearing at every turn. Jesus stepped forward again. His radiance shook the corridor. He said they were called to be light, but led my flock into darkness with false words. In the mirrors, the faithful wept. Their hands reached out for help, but the priests could not touch them, trapped in a prison of regret. Their sentence was to walk endlessly through this hall, where each mirror reflected another moment of faith. I trembled, thinking of the church I served. If priests were here, could Pope Francis escape judgment? I still held hope. He was beloved by the people. Surely he would ascend to heaven. The angel led me through the suffocating darkness of hell, where the air was thick with the smell of burnt ash and a chill that pierced into the soul. They stopped before a massive stone door, its surface carved with ancient patterns, like the secret documents I once saw in the Vatican archive. The door opened, revealing a vast, shadowy chamber, with only a single massive mirror at the center. The mirror, towering like a cathedral dome, had a surface that shimmered like frozen water, reflecting a dim, cold light. I stepped inside, my feet feeling pulled into the stone floor, my heart pounding as I recognized a familiar figure. It was Pope Francis. his white garments torn and soiled with mud and blood, standing alone before the mirror, his face twisted in pain. I froze in shock, heart stopped, breath caught. "Why is he here?" I cried out silently, my voice lost. I had been preparing his final arrangements in the Vatican, believing he was still alive, though gravely ill. The whole church, the people, and I myself saw him as a light. The Pope for the poor, the humble one with the warm smile, surely destined for heaven. Yet here he stood, in this room of hell, his eyes heavy with regret, seemingly imprisoned by the mirror before him. My heart twisted, as if torn between faith and the truth. The mirror began to tremble, letting out a sound like slowly breaking glass, sharp and cold. Its surface no longer shimmered, turning into a living screen, showing the promises he once made. "We will reform the church. The poor are the heart of the gospel. I will bring people together." Each word echoed, loud like a church bell, but distorted, as if strangled by darkness. The mirror cracked, lines spreading like spiderwebs, and shards of glass launched into the air, spinning like blades. They flew at Francis, cutting into not his flesh but the very core of his being, making him cry out, the sound of his pain echoing through the chamber. Blood flowed from invisible wounds, deep red, dripping onto the stone floor, forming a growing pool that reflected the mirror's light like a lake of blood. I wanted to run to him, but my feet were frozen, nailed to the ground. The mirror kept changing, the faces of the poor and hungry at the refugee camps he had promised to help, migrants left behind at borders, the faithful lost in a divided church. Their eyes, hundreds, thousands, stared at Francis, unblinking, like flames scorching him. A migrant mother in torn clothes, holding her emaciated child, whispered, "You promised to save us." An old believer, clutching a crucifix, murmured, "You let us wander." Each word summoned another shard, stabbing deeper, making Francis bend over, clutching his chest, tears mixing with blood. He tried to cover the mirror, as if to block the memories, but the shards clung to him, tightening like invisible thorned vines. "I tried," he cried out, voice hoarse, but the mirror didn't stop. It showed the divided church, bishops fighting for power, the faithful turning away, scandals and abuse covered up. Each image was another cut, like his very promises turning back to punish him. I stood there, trembling, realizing that this torment was not fire or chains, but truth. The truth he had avoided, the promises he did not keep. Suddenly, a column of black smoke rose from the ground, condensing into Satan, towering and more terrifying than any creature I had ever seen. He stood twice the height of a man, his skin the color of ash, eyes glowing red like burning coals. A twisted grin revealed rows of sharp teeth, each like a blade. His tattered bat wings flapped slightly, releasing a freezing wind laced with the stench of destruction. He stepped toward Francis, long claws tapping against the stone floor with a screeching sound. "He descended here on Easter, the very day you sing of life," Satan roared, his voice half laughter, half wrath, echoing like thunder. He swung his arm toward Francis, and the mirror shards spun faster, cutting deeper. "He promised light, but let darkness spread." I was horrified, my head spinning. Francis had died on April 21st, Easter, and the news had not yet been released. How could this be? I remembered his sermons, the times he washed the feet of the poor. But Satan didn't stop. He leaned in close, his face inches from Francis, exhaling black smoke that made him cough violently. It spoke of the poor, yet let them die in despair. Satan laughed, a sound like razors tearing through flesh that made me want to cover my ears. "The church is divided, drowning in lies. It's all mine." He raised his claw and traced a circle in the air. The mirror responded, showing more scenes, bishops arguing, abuse, documents hidden, the vulnerable abandoned. Satan clapped his hands like an audience at a theater, savoring Francis's agony. Francis collapsed, blood flowing from his soul like a stream, but his eyes stayed fixed on the mirror, unable to look away. "I tried," he whispered, voice fading beneath Satan's laughter. Then Satan turned, locking his fiery gaze onto me, his red eyes blazing as if they could devour my soul. "You see now, Lucia, even the one called Light belongs to me." I stepped back, heart racing, but the angel beside me touched my shoulder gently, infusing me with a hint of courage. And then light exploded into the room, driving back the black smoke. Jesus appeared, his white robe radiant, his light a sacred flame, warm, pure, and overwhelming. The mirror trembled, the shards stopped spinning. Satan growled and backed away, his wings curling inward. Jesus walked forward, his eyes sorrowful yet majestic, resting on Francis. Hayward was entrusted with my flock, yet let words obscure his duty, he said, his voice deep like the ocean. He promised reform, but let the church bleed. A promise without action is a shattered mirror that cuts the soul. He pointed at the mirror. It changed, once again showing the faces of the poor, but this time their expressions softened, their eyes pleaded, not in judgment, but in hope of repentance. Francis wept, tears mixed with blood, his body trembled. "Lord, forgive me," he whispered, choking with emotion. Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder. A gentle light spread from his touch, soothing the wounds, though the blood still flowed. "My justice does not overlook," Jesus said, "but light remains for those who repent." His words offered a beam of hope amid the pain. Satan shrieked, claws scraping his throne, but the light drove him back, his black smoke dissolving into nothingness. I collapsed to my knees, tears spilling from my eyes, trembling in awe. If even Francis, the one I revered, was here, who could escape the justice of God? The room darkened once more, but the light of Christ remained, as a reminder that truth, no matter how painful, is the only path to light. The angel led me to a vast chamber in hell, resembling a courtroom but cold and shrouded in darkness. The grey stone walls were carved with growling creatures that seemed almost alive. Dim light from the cracks above barely illuminated a rotting wooden platform in the center. Satan sat high upon a throne behind it, enormous, eyes gleaming with hatred, his sinister grin slicing the air like a blade. In front of the platform stood the trembling souls of church leaders, cardinals, bishops, and 2 popes I recognized, John Paul II and Benedict XVI, their white robes torn, their faces marked by regret. Francis was nowhere in sight, but I heard faint groans from afar, as if he were still enduring the torment I had witnessed in the mirror chamber. Satan pointed at me, his voice hissing like wind through a graveyard. "Lucia, you came to witness my trial. These men in white belong to me, and you will too." He turned toward the direction of the groans and sneered. "Francis just arrived. Let him enjoy the torment of the truth he once buried. There are many tricks I have planned for him." I trembled, recalling the shattered mirror and the blood-soaked floor in the chamber before, my heart aching at the thought of him, the man I once believed was the church's guiding light. Satan pointed to John, whose eyes were full of fear. Smoke rose from the platform like a living screen, displaying scenes of him covering up abuse scandals, dismissing the pleas of victims to protect the church's image. Faces of innocent children appeared in the smoke, their eyes sharp with pain, whispering, "You abandoned us." John knelt, trying to cover his face, but the smoke tightened around him, as if his very sins were choking him. Virtue, Satan laughed loudly. He thought reputation would save him, but truth belongs to me. Then Satan turned to Benedict, who bowed his head, hands trembling. The smoke shifted, revealing how he had known of evil within the church, but remained silent, resigning to escape responsibility, leaving chaos and power struggles behind. Images of the fractured church appeared, bishops in conflict, the faithful lost, echoing cries that sliced through the soul like blades. Benedict covered his ears, but the cries pierced through, causing him to collapse. Satan roared. He ran, but he could not escape me. Fear like ice swept through me. I recalled the abuse reports I had read in the Vatican archives, and all the times I remained silent out of fear of causing scandal. Satan stretched out tendrils of smoke, cold as death, and one touched my soul. You are part of this church too, Lucia. Every silence of yours made me stronger. I felt my soul being dragged downward into his courtroom, my heart pounding, breath short and erratic. But then the memory of prayer in my little Vatican office rose up in me. I cried out, "Lord Jesus, save me!" Light burst forth. Jesus appeared, his robe radiant white, his light like a sacred flame, warm and mighty, forcing Satan to recoil on his throne. He walked toward the platform, his eyes tender yet commanding, and spoke, "Darkness cannot overcome my light. These souls face justice for deceit and abandoning the flock, but light is still given to those who repent." His light became a blinding beam, dissolving Satan's smoky tendrils. The entire chamber shook, and the stone walls cracked. He looked at John and Benedict, and his light passed over them, carrying a glimmer of hope into their sorrow. Then he turned to me, his voice deep and warm. "Lucia, bring truth back to the world so the church does not fall into darkness." I knelt, tears flowing, and pleaded, "Lord, give me strength." He placed his hand upon my shoulder, and a deep peace flooded through me, driving away my fear. Satan let out one last laugh, his voice weakening. "You may leave, but darkness will watch you." Then he vanished into black smoke, his throne left empty. I stood, my heart still pounding but filled with resolve. This trial had not only judged them, it was a divine awakening for me. Faith is a weapon, and I must act, so the church will not belong to the darkness. Jesus stood before me in a radiant light, warm like a sacred flame, dispelling the darkness of hell. His eyes were gentle yet majestic, as if they could see through the depths of my soul. He took my hand, and his deep, tender voice rang out, "Lucia, my justice shows no partiality. I have chosen someone to lead the church anew, a humble one, a heart burning for the weak, determined to bring light into the dark corners of my flock. But you too must do your part. Carry this truth back to the world so that light may triumph." His words flowed into me like a current of power, but also left a lingering question. Who is this person? I wanted to ask, but the light surged, swept me up, and I felt my soul being pulled forcefully back into my body. My eyelids were heavy, as if weighed down by stone. I opened my eyes. Blinding white light from the Vatican hospital ceiling pierced through, making me squint. The smell of antiseptic and the beeping of monitors flooded my senses. I lay in bed, my body frail, breath shallow, as though I had just run 1,000 miles. The sisters gathered around me, their faces full of worry. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. Only a whisper came out. When strength returned, I asked Sister Maria, "Pope Francis, how is he?" She lowered her head, eyes red, and whispered, "He passed away on April 21st. The Vatican hasn't announced it yet, but we were just informed." My heart clenched, as if crushed. Satan's words in hell echoed, "He descended here on Easter Sunday." I froze. Tears welled up. The man I revered, the one I believed would surely enter heaven, was there, in that place of darkness. A few days later, I was strong enough to stand. I asked for permission to speak at the small church in the Vatican, where parishioners, priests, and several bishops had gathered. Standing at the pulpit, colored light from the stained glass fell across my black habit. My heart pounded, as if I were again before Satan's tribunal. The room was silent. Eyes filled with curiosity and doubt stared back at me. I took a deep breath and began. "I have seen hell, where God's justice judges every soul, even those we once revered." My voice trembled, but each word felt led by his light. I spoke of cardinals who hid falsehoods, of priests who led the flock astray, and the accusing eyes of the faithful reflected in the mirror. I spoke of John Paul II, loved by the world, but kneeling before the victims of abuse, eyes like blades, because he had hidden crimes to protect the Church's image. I spoke of Benedict XVI, who knew of evil but stayed silent, resigning, leaving the Church to unravel, while the people's cries cut like knives. And most painfully, I spoke of Francis, the man I had believed to be the light, standing before a mirror of remorse, blood flowing from promises unkept, reform, aid for the poor, unity. I spoke of Satan, laughing from his throne, exploiting these failures to drag the Church into darkness. The crowd was stunned. I knew they couldn't accept it yet, just as I hadn't at first. Back in my room, I began writing in my journal, recording every detail: the shattered mirror, Satan's laughter, the light of Christ. I sent letters to the bishops, including the abuse reports I had once read in the Vatican's archives, urging them to reveal the truth and protect the victims. I knew my letter might stir controversy, but I could no longer remain silent. Each night, I knelt before the statue of Jesus, praying for the Church and for the new Pope God had chosen, a humble, devoted one whose face I had yet to see. Days passed, and my words began to spread. The Vatican Church filled to capacity. Lay people, priests and bishops came to listen. My journal was published, igniting a movement for transparency. Bishops convened conferences, released abuse records, and vowed to protect the innocent. Some opposed it, calling me a troublemaker, but many supported the cause, finding hope in the truth. I led charity projects, bringing the poor and migrants closer to the Church, fulfilling what Francis had once promised. The lay community awakened, holding leaders accountable, praying for a purified Church. One bishop said to me, "Sister Lucia, you've awakened us." I smiled, knowing it was the light of Christ. But Satan's words still haunted me. The darkness will watch. Every night I prayed, asking God to protect the Church from falling again. I wrote to the new Pope urging him to continue the reforms. My near-death journey had transformed both me and the Church, but one thing I knew with certainty: God's justice and His light are eternal, leading through every shadow. Driven by a deep desire to understand the boundary between faith and truth, Lucia began opening her heart to those who had experienced the journey between life and death. She spent much time speaking with and listening to the people who sought her out. And unexpectedly, a female scholar came forward, claiming she had been forewarned that Pope Francis would be dragged into hell. But her story, which will be revealed shortly, was unlike anything Lucia had ever encountered. The woman had even seen 2 other popes, also suffering torment in hell. For most Catholics, the belief that popes go to heaven is almost unquestionable. They are seen as men who lived faithfully for God, led His Church, and devoted their entire lives to the faith. But what if that belief, so deeply rooted in the hearts of millions, was suddenly shaken? This story comes from a female scholar who had been researching Catholicism. For her, it was purely academic, until the day her heart stopped. In the very moment her soul left her body, she was taken to the darkest depths of the afterlife. There she saw something no Catholic would ever expect: revered popes suffering in hell. And then came the final blow. She saw Pope Francis being dragged toward the abyss. Why would the current leader of the Catholic Church appear in such a terrifying place? What truth is hiding behind the white robe? Listen until the end, because maybe you were chosen to see what others refuse to face. Welcome to Eternal Bible Stories, where real near-death experiences are told to awaken faith and illuminate the soul. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. And leave your name and the city you're watching from in the comments, so that God knows you're here, watching, and ready to receive His blessings. Now listen closely to her story. My name is Mary. I live with my husband and our 2 children in a small, quiet home nestled in the suburbs of Ohio. We don't have much in terms of wealth, but we have love, and for me, that's always been more than enough. Our days passed simply, filled with familiar routines, laughter, and the gentle peace of everyday life. But everything began to shift on the morning of September 29, 2024. The autumn sunlight filtered through the window, casting a soft glow on the thin white curtains. But from the moment I opened my eyes, I felt that something wasn't right. A dull ache throbbed at the base of my neck and slowly spread to my temples. I furrowed my brows, telling myself it was probably just fatigue or a bad night's sleep. It had happened a few times before, so I didn't think much of it. I tried to start my day as usual, making breakfast, reviewing my shopping list and feeding the cat. But the pain grew heavier. My vision began to blur, as if a thin mist had settled over everything. Every breath I took felt shallow and strained, like something heavy was pressing down on my chest. Still, I tried to brush it off, to keep things under control. That's just how I am, always trying to hold on, always afraid of being a burden to others. But then I noticed my husband watching me closely. He stepped forward, placed his hand on my shoulder, and said with concern in his voice, "You're not okay. We need to call the doctor." I shook my head. "No need, I just need a bit of rest." But just as the words left my mouth, a bolt of pain like lightning shot through my head, doubling me over. Everything started spinning. The sounds around me grew distant. I felt my legs give out beneath me, and the last thing I saw before collapsing was the panicked face of my husband, calling my name in desperation. On what seemed like an ordinary morning, I had no idea I was approaching the threshold between life and death. A doorway that, once crossed, would show me things I had never dared to imagine in my entire life. The doctor arrived, gave me an injection, and told me I needed to rest. I lay down on the bed, just hoping to get a little sleep to ease the pain. As I closed my eyes, I began to sense something strange within me, as if a deep unease was rising from the depths of my soul. After a while, with my eyes still tightly shut, I felt the room suddenly fill with an unbelievably radiant light. I wanted to open my eyes to see what was happening, but I couldn't. As if my body no longer responded to my will, and then I realized something astounding. My physical body was still lying motionless on the bed, but my soul had separated from it. When I became aware that I had left my body, my first sensation was overwhelming confusion. I looked down and saw myself lying there, motionless on the bed, like someone in a deep sleep or already dead. I tried to make sense of what was happening. On one hand, I observed my surroundings. The familiar room now seemed different from this perspective. On the other hand, I was trying to understand why my soul felt so light, as if all physical burdens had vanished. Everything around me was silent, but that silence held a fullness to it, as if the space was saturated with an invisible energy. I oscillated between 2 states, a strange and profound sense of peace mixed with fear of the unknown. I had no idea what was waiting ahead, and my mind was both expectant and trembling. Suddenly, 2 radiant figures appeared in the room. At first, I couldn't tell what they were. I only saw 2 glowing shapes, as if made of pure light. But as they moved closer, I realized they were angels. They wore garments of pure white, emanating a graceful beauty, and their faces shone as though lit from within by a sacred source of light. They appeared right beside me, watching me intently, but without saying a word. At that moment, my heart was flooded with questions. What is happening to me? I didn't know who they were or why they were there, but their presence made me feel both curious and bewildered. One of the 2 angels approached me and spoke with a clear, radiant voice. "Mary, rise. There are places we must go." That sentence echoed like a gentle command, yet full of authority, piercing straight into my consciousness. In that moment, I felt no desire to resist. Instead, an unexpected and profound sense of trust rose within me, as if I instinctively knew I was being guided by something sacred and safe. I began to follow them, moving with a miraculous lightness that can only be felt when the soul is freed from the weight of the physical body. I didn't walk as one normally does. Instead, I glided, as if being carried by an invisible current of energy. I didn't know where I was going with the angels. The journey seemed endless, but I had lost all concept of time. Everything was unfolding in a realm beyond the usual limitations of the material world. No minutes, no fatigue, only my presence and the guiding presence of the angels. After a span that could not be measured, a massive black door appeared before us. That door was unlike anything I had ever seen in my life. It was so tall it seemed to pierce the invisible sky above, carved with ancient symbols I could not understand, yet they stirred a feeling both sacred and threatening. The surface of the door was not smooth. It shifted slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if the door itself was breathing. Each breath it exhaled carried a strange scent, burnt and icy at once, as if it were the meeting point of fire and frost, of life and death. A cold shiver ran down my spine and fear began to creep into my mind. It wasn't ordinary fear, but a deep warning that if I stepped through this door, I would witness things I could never unsee. But when I looked at the angels, their calm and gentle eyes soothed my fear. Their wings fluttered once, sending a soft breeze that wrapped me in warmth. They said nothing, but their presence was a comfort, as if to assure me that everything was under control. And then, one of the angels stepped forward, placed his hand upon the door, and in that moment, everything changed. One of the angels reached out and slowly opened the massive black door. At that very moment, a completely different world appeared before my eyes. As we stepped inside, a wave of intense heat suddenly blasted into my face. The air felt so thick and suffocating that it seemed almost impossible to breathe. Flames blazed everywhere, but these were not the kind of flames I had ever known. Each tongue of fire seemed alive, moving with a consciousness of its own, creating a scene that was both strange and terrifying. The angels led me deeper into hell, and each step felt like it was etching an indescribable sensation into my soul, a sense of eternal despair. There was no light, no time, no waiting for a tomorrow. Everything here was immersed in a thick, liquid-like darkness, so black it felt almost tangible. The air was heavy, blazing hot like molten ash, yet paradoxically cold, seeping into every crevice of thought like invisible fingers choking the will. All around me were screams, not quite human but distorted sounds, groans and howls so intense that my soul trembled from the shock. I saw souls burning in flames, not physical fire like in the earthly realm, but flames of regret, of spiritual nakedness. They writhed in that fire, never dying, only living endlessly in the pain they themselves had sown. I saw some people being dragged through deep pits like volcanic mouths, then thrown into swirling abysses, bottomless, endless. They fell forever, their screams echoing and fading into the darkness. Other souls were bound to black pillars of fire, where each sinful memory from their past played out like a looping film, each replay bringing a deeper agony than before. I saw a woman whose entire body appeared to be wrapped in invisible chains, with iron hooks piercing deeply into her soul. Every time she tried to struggle, the chains tightened even more, and groans of deep remorse escaped from her mouth. The angels continued walking beside me, the light from them forming a narrow path through the darkness. One of the angels spoke to me, his voice gentle yet solemn. This is the final place for those who deliberately turned away from the light. This is not God's punishment. It is the natural consequence of a soul that has rejected him. I looked into the eyes of the souls. Each one carried a story, a wound, a mistake for which there was no turning back. Some were on their knees, some were screaming, and some remained silent with wide eyes, forever facing themselves in a punishment from which they could never escape. And then, as we descended further, the darkness itself seemed to shift. A new figure emerged in the distance, tall, regal, yet cloaked in shadows. The angels said, "The first person you will see here is someone once known to the whole world." As the face slowly came into view, I held my breath. As we went deeper into the heart of hell, the surrounding torment intensified. The screams blended into one another, the smell of burning flesh filled the air, and the endless darkness seeped into my very being. As I drew closer, a particular figure caught my attention. A soul kneeling on the ground, hands covering their face, weeping and suffering without end. As I drew closer, I recognized who it was: Pope John Paul II. He was weeping, and the tears of a pope flowed endlessly. But it wasn't just physical pain tormenting him. His soul was carrying a burden far greater. I felt an intense longing to understand the reason behind his suffering, but the angels remained silent. I only knew that I was meant to watch. At that moment, I felt the presence of Jesus. The atmosphere around me shifted, as if every worry and heaviness had been lifted from my chest. A gentle light spread throughout the space, not blinding, but enough to make everything clearer and feel safer. I heard no footsteps, no voice, but I knew he was near. Each breath became easier, and a sense of peace rose within me, unlike anything I had ever known before. There was no need for an introduction. I simply knew it was him. He slowly approached me and continued to observe the scene unfolding before us. Pope John Paul II was surrounded by souls drawing near to him. These souls were victims of abuse, and their pain was clearly visible on their faces. They encircled the Pope, looking at him with eyes full of sorrow. Each one carried profound grief and deep regret. The Pope seemed to collapse even further under the weight of his inability to help them. He cried out, but no one heard his voice. Every scream he released seemed to echo the inner agony of those souls. At that moment, Jesus began to speak, his voice gentle yet heavy. This man was once recognized as a messenger of God on earth. Hundreds trusted him and sought refuge in the safety of the church, but he failed to protect the most vulnerable. His indifference toward the scandals of sexual abuse, the dark secrets of the church that he tried to cover up, now come at a great cost here. The Pope's agony intensified. As I watched him, I could feel the depth of his pain growing with every passing second. Jesus extended his hand, and the specters of the abuse victims continued to circle the Pope. They could not find redemption, and because of the Pope's lack of sufficient intervention, their suffering deepened. The regret on his face stemmed not only from the mistakes he made in life, but also from his failure to aid the innocent souls. His punishment resembled an eternal loop. Each moment he was forced to relive the same pain, to confront the same regret, as the souls of the victims surrounded him, each staring at him with a silent plea for accountability. Jesus continued, he was responsible not only for the physical, but for the souls, and he failed in that responsibility. He spoke directly to Pope John Paul II. You were loved by many and seen as holy throughout the world, but in the eyes of God, protecting each innocent soul comes first. You remained silent to protect the reputation of the Church. That silence, that indifference, is why you are condemned to eternal punishment here. The Pope tried to cover his face with both hands, but his tears wouldn't stop. In that moment, the souls of the abuse victims reached out and gently pulled his hands away, reminding him that he was the source of their suffering. The scene was filled with such overwhelming remorse that even breathing became difficult for me. Every line on the Pope's face reflected the inner torment and deep sorrow of his soul. Jesus turned to me and said gently, Such mistakes are unforgivable in the eyes of God. He should have understood the weight of his responsibility. The protection of the innocent is paramount. Though he was revered by many in the world, here, justice is still upheld. The agony of Pope John Paul II will never end. He will continue to endure the consequences of his overlooked mistakes and the Church's silence. Facing the victims of abuse is his eternal torment. Hell is not only a place of physical pain, but the epicenter of spiritual anguish. Here I understood how divine justice is carried out, and that nothing can be hidden from God's eyes. Witnessing this scene was truly difficult for me, but it also made me realize an inescapable truth. Every soul must pay the price for the sins they have committed, no matter how holy they were considered on earth. The eternal suffering of Pope John Paul II was both a warning to believers around the world and a testament to the power of God's justice. The angels turned to me and said, "What you have seen is only the beginning. There is still more for you to learn." My journey through hell was not yet over, and ahead, another well-known soul was waiting. The angels led me to another place, one shrouded in darkness and thick fog. The atmosphere here was much heavier than in the previous areas where I had seen other souls. It felt as though the black mist itself was a manifestation of deep regret and the weight of responsibilities abandoned by the suffering souls in this place. The density of the air pressed down on me with every breath. Through the haze, a figure slowly emerged. I recognized him immediately. It was Pope Benedict XVI, kneeling on the ground, his hands covering his face, with serpents wrapped around his body. Screams and whispers echoed endlessly around him. These sounds seemed like voices from the past, cries he had ignored and tried to silence. Each scream carried a weight that pressed down heavily on my spirit. Seeing Benedict surrounded by such profound anguish stirred something deeply unsettling within me. The regret etched into him revealed how he had evaded his responsibilities during his time as Pope. Jesus slowly approached me and began to clarify the scene before my eyes. Just like the punishment faced by Pope John Paul II, this vision was filled with the pain of abuse victims. However, Benedict's punishment was even more complex. He was not only facing the sins he had overlooked, but also the torment of having abandoned his role as Pope. Jesus looked upon Pope Benedict with deep sorrow and said, "He held the highest position in the Church, but when he saw evil, he remained silent. Instead of confronting the scandals of abuse, he chose to conceal them, and when the burden became too great, he fled. He abandoned his responsibility." Benedict covered his ears, but the screams of the victims grew louder, piercing through his soul. Each echo was a shard of returning memory, a wounded childlike soul, a plea for help ignored, an innocent gaze trampled. The weight of his silence and indifference tormented him without end. Every scream was a reminder of his failure to act. The black clouds of regret swirled around him, demanding justice. Jesus turned to me and said, his resignation was not just an escape, it magnified the pain within the Church. Financial scandals and corruption thrived in the silence he allowed. I understood why Benedict's punishment differed from that of John Paul II. If John Paul II carried the burden of delayed response, Benedict bore a double weight, both for ignoring the cries of the victims and for retreating from responsibility when the Church needed him most. His resignation, once seen by the world as an act of humility or wisdom, was now revealed as a withdrawal that left a power vacuum filled with chaos, corruption, and devastating financial scandals. The dark clouds of remorse thickened around him. They didn't come from the outside, but emerged from within his own soul, as though every buried memory had become a cloud of smoke wrapping tightly around him. I saw him trembling, not from cold, but because he knew nothing could be hidden anymore. Every choice he had made, every word he had withheld, every action he had avoided, all had now become witnesses against him. And when I turned to look at Jesus, I didn't see anger in him, but a profound sorrow. A sorrow for a soul that once had the chance to glorify God, but chose silence when faced with darkness. We continued descending deeper into hell. The air grew thicker and the agony more intense. Before me appeared a massive, terrifying throne. Sitting on it was Satan. The most dreadful place in hell now awaited. At that very moment, a chilling cold swept over my entire being. Satan, in his enormous form, sat upon the throne, his eyes gleaming and a sinister smile spreading across his face as he surveyed everything around him. He had summoned both popes, John Paul II and Benedict XVII, who knelt and writhed in regret before him. Satan seemed to bind them with invisible chains, relishing their torment. But even in the darkest corner of hell, a ray of hope appeared. A radiant, peaceful light suddenly spread, like a force that could purify everything. Satan's mocking laughter abruptly stopped. As I closed my eyes and turned toward that light, I felt the presence of Jesus. The warmth and love from him brought a profound sense of peace within me. Satan's terrifying gaze and the horrifying scenes of hell faded under this light. Jesus stepped toward Satan's throne. In that moment, the pride on Satan's face seemed to fade. Even the presence of Jesus made him tremble. Jesus turned to me and spoke gently. "Mary, what you've seen is the truth, but you must also learn the lesson within these truths." He reached out toward Pope Benedict and John Paul II. Both trembled slightly as they lifted their heads. The presence of Jesus made the depth of their remorse unmistakably visible. He leaned down close to them and spoke softly but firmly. "You were once the leaders of the church, but you committed grave errors. Your silence and avoidance of responsibility have caused great harm to the house of God. You failed to fulfill your calling, and now you are feeling the full weight of that failure." Then Jesus whispered a verse from Luke 17:2. "It would be better for them to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck than to cause one of these little ones to stumble." These words deepened the pain and remorse in the eyes of both Pope Benedict and John Paul II. They had failed to stop the abuse that had wounded the most vulnerable within the church, and they had remained silent. Jesus then turned to Benedict and reminded him of James 4:17. "So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." These words referred to his resignation and abandonment of duty. He reminded Benedict of the great responsibility he had been given and had left unfulfilled. Turning to Pope John Paul II, Jesus recited Matthew 23:27-28, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead, and everything unclean." Jesus pointed out that John Paul II had been seen as a holy figure outwardly, but had hidden the darkness within the church. He used these scriptures not only to highlight the spiritual consequences of their actions, but to show that these were not just worldly failures. The cries of the abuse victims revealed the inner collapse of their souls. He emphasized that they must confront not only their silence, but also the evil they had allowed to thrive. Then Jesus placed his hand on their heads. "You were regarded as great leaders on earth, but in the kingdom of God, leadership comes with responsibility, and you failed to uphold that responsibility." In that moment, the remorse on the faces of Benedict and John Paul II deepened even further. They trembled beneath the hand of Jesus, yet also began to feel the cleansing power of true repentance. Jesus turned to me and repeated the scriptures once more. "As you have seen, everything a person does or fails to do is laid bare before the eyes of God. The world may have called them holy, but the truth is always revealed before the Lord." At that point it seemed that Jesus was imparting a message to me, a message meant for the believers still living on earth. Then he began to lift Pope Benedict and John Paul II upward. They had faced their sins, endured the fire of hell, and now they saw a glimmer of hope in the hands of Jesus. I do not know whether they were fully redeemed, but I sensed that Jesus was leading them into a deeper confrontation with their wrongs, guiding them to unlearn what the world had taught and to begin again on a different level. Jesus finally turned to me and said, "Anyone who is a leader, who guides others, carries the greatest responsibility, and every leader must answer to the justice of God." These words were a lesson for me. Everyone on earth, especially those in positions of leadership, will be held accountable before the eyes of the Lord. As Jesus lifted them up, he radiated like a beam of light piercing through the darkness of hell. The influence of Satan began to diminish, and the bleak landscape of hell seemed to shrink under the brilliance of Christ's light. Satan appeared to retreat, though the mocking look in his eyes still hinted at his continued delight in future downfalls. He looked at me, then smiled, a chilling, ominous smile. "Only one soul remains," he hissed, his voice echoing from the depths, "and he too will be mine." I turned around as if to ask who he meant, but Satan only laughed, refusing to answer directly. Then he leaned in and whispered slowly, venomously, "He still wears the white robe, but the light in him has long gone out. You'll all see soon enough. Until then, farewell, my little friend." And with that he vanished into the shadows. I wanted to ask more, but the light had already surrounded me, and when I opened my eyes, I had returned to the world of the living. As Jesus lifted me out of the dark corners of hell, I felt a profound peace flooding my soul. His presence wrapped around me, and the terrifying images I had witnessed began to dissolve little by little. My soul felt lighter, though the weight of everything I had seen still echoed in my mind. When I opened my eyes, I saw familiar faces around me. My husband and my children standing by the bed looking at me with concern. Everything felt so surreal that even returning to my own body felt like a dream. But I knew what I had experienced was neither a dream nor a figment of imagination. Everything I had seen had left deep imprints on my soul. My breathing was still uneven, but now there was a deep awakening inside me. The words of Jesus continued to echo in my mind. Every leader must answer to the justice of God. Those words were not only a message for the popes I had seen in hell, they were also a reminder to me. I realized that I, too, needed to reflect on my own life and responsibility. I wasn't just called to live in this world, but to remain faithful to the path of God. So Mary's story has come to an end. And if you're still here, listening all the way to the end, perhaps it's because God wants you to see what she saw. Because the truth she witnessed wasn't just about popes or leaders, it was about all of us. What she saw was justice, complete and undeniable, and that justice doesn't care about titles or fame. It looks at the heart. It sees what we try to hide. And one day, every one of us will have to face it. This story is meant to wake you up, to remind us of the way we live, the way we lead, and the way we respond to the pain of others. It all matters. Every silence, every choice, every time we look away. He sees it. And if something in this story stirred your heart, share your thoughts below. You never know. What you write today might be the light that leads another wandering soul home. And don't forget to hit subscribe to continue journeying with eternal Bible stories, where true testimonies are shared, not just to be heard, but to heal and bring you closer to God. Thank you for listening. May this truth stay rooted in your heart, and may the grace of God guide your steps from this day forward.